Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Show Up with Cameron Gran. I am your host, Cameron Gran. And as always, I wanted to start with a reminder just that I'm not a therapist. I'm just somebody who is going on his own mental health journey, trying to give you guys like little tips and tricks that I have used that have helped me. But the big thing I always advocate for is that advocating for yourself is important. And while we can all find these little tips that on the internet, it's more about like trying some. And then your brain will kind of tell you what works for you best. Because really, I think the number one thing you have to start doing is just trusting yourself. And the more you trust yourself, the more you'll be able to catch and hopefully steer away from or address and then release. Because there are situations that we like lose all sense of control in, and that's more of when I would steer away from. But then there are situations where we just kind of avoid, and avoidance isn't a good thing to do. So that's when you need to address and then release. And that's usually what I mean when I do the metaphor of how like on a beach we have the wave, and like no matter what you do, even if you have like a fortified sandcastle, eventually the pressure of the water will come over that castle. And you can either be really resistant to that, or you can just kind of accept it and just allow that like emotion to wash over you, because eventually it will go, and then you'll be left with what I call neutral, which is kind of like your everyday state of being. Because something that gets preached a lot is like we all want happiness all the time. And I do want happiness in my life, but like what I've noticed is when I'm always looking for when is the next time I'm going to be happy, or I'm not happy right now, I lose the chance to take in opportunities of happiness, because I'm obsessed with either the past or what has not happened around me, or just not being aware of my surroundings. I thought today would be really interesting just to talk about what I call the game. Over Christmas break, while I've been gone, everyone else might have been celebrating Christmas, but me, I was just binging a show that I was very surprised I even binged, because I've been so resistant to watching the show, mostly because I didn't get it at first, because there's a lot of things that I don't like in shows that were happening, because I don't like watching things that seem pointless. What I mean is like certain like topics or what's being like, it's an HBO show. And like HBO is a paid for like show, a service. So there's a lot more like nudity and stuff that happens on it. And so for that reason, I never have watched Game of Thrones, because the very first season is very heavy in it. And then I binged it, and I realized what I think is the reason why Game of Thrones is so popular. Is a lot of people think it's like a metaphor for politics, or like how to hold on to something no matter what it cost you. And something that I became obsessed with when I was watching it is, yes, you have the characters in the show, and yes, you have like the world building of like winter's coming, that's a huge thing, because apparently when the winter comes, it lasts a very long time, often years at a time, which I think is a crazy about a season, because they've had summer for so long in the show, and then eventually when winter hits, you have winter for years at a time. So, kind of like Narnia, but more adult. The thing that I wanted to talk about is kind of like what I realized I like about just like some things in life is like I enjoy puzzles. And like a lot of shows, I feel like, especially if you're watching reality TV, it's more about like just being entertaining in the moment. It's not really about like creating a puzzle to make people think while they're watching something. And that's more of what I enjoy. And like what I realized, especially because Game of Thrones, for anybody who was like me beforehand, is one of the most spoiled shows out there. Like, I can't tell you the amount of things that I knew was going to happen in the show, and it was really more about the journey that I wanted to watch than actually not knowing about things. Like, there is room for people to be like to die that I wasn't aware died. Sean Bean, I'm pretty sure that's his name, always dies. I don't care. He's just somebody, I've watched so many things with him where he literally is the character that dies, and I honestly am curious whether or not that's in his contract, because he plays Ned Stark, who is the instigating incident for every single character in the show. that kind of launches the entire eight seasons, 10 years of programming. And the thing that I liked about the show is it's kind of a lesson in writing, in the sense that I don't know if this is the author, because I've never read the books, or if this is all really the writers on the show, because I think with only 10 episodes a season, you have more of an ability to, go in and plan out an entire thing. But and then, like, I've seen interviews with Peter Dinklage where he says, like, oh no, they had to all root it out from the beginning. And having binged it all, I kind of believe it, mostly because nothing happens in Game of Thrones that isn't somehow going to pay off at another point in the show. And that was kind of something that I started to actually be really curious of, because there are so many things that I'm like, why am I seeing this? And the more you watch the show, you're like, oh, that's why it was important for me to see that. It wasn't for no reason. And then also, when you start catching on to the game, that's when you realize some of the flaws of that game, which is, to me, it's a beautiful lesson in manipulation, because nothing shown to the audience is shown just so you guys can feel close to the main characters. Like, we're not shown anything about Daenerys Targaryen, that's what the name is. We're not showing anything about her that doesn't mean something for the show. I mean, to be clear, I think Daenerys is a character where we see the most, like, things that don't matter, if that makes sense. Like, most characters, if we're seeing something, it will have something that pays off towards the end. It's not something like, here's an example. If anybody's ever watched Gilmore Girls, like, Gilmore Girls has a game between, like, the wealthy and, like, mid-class and even poor, and that's a game that we see. But we also have a lot of episodes where 20 to 40% of the episode is you just enjoying these characters, breathing life into it. It's not about a manipulation that's happening to the audience. Like, I think even, like, that's a 44-minute episode, whereas Friends, sitcoms are more along the lines of, we're seeing something fun with these characters that we love. So the characters are what matter. Whereas I think Game of Thrones, you see characters, but they're kind of figureheads, which eventually I started to look at them as, like, a chess set. Like, what moves do I have to make so that I win the Iron Throne? And that's when I started to enjoy the game, like the show, more. For instance, it's been a long time. Everyone knows about the phrase "the Red Wedding," and when I was watching it, I even was like, okay, I know this is coming up. What could possibly lead to this? Because I knew that it was an event, and I knew that it's known for being bloody because it's called the Red Wedding, and something that I wanted to understand was, okay, what is this about, and what is the circumstances? And then it became more of making your brain think in a new way, because I grew up in a haunted house, and because of that, a game that plays in haunted houses is, once you're in the cast, everybody is trying to mess with everybody else. Like, you're not safe while you're at work. You might be trying to scare other people, but other actors are also going to try to scare you between, like, runs of people. And it just becomes this fun game between people. And with the Red Wedding, I realized, oh, so this is shock value for sure, but it's also a game and understanding the fact that this is happening for the writer's convenience. And I'll elaborate on that, because Robb Stark is the character that passes away at the Red Wedding. I'm not going to talk about it too in depth, because on the radio, on YouTube, and I just don't want to be extremely graphic. But basically, Robb Stark and his mom and his wife go out in a very brutal way. But the thing that I realized, which is I think the flaw of the logic of the show sometimes, is they had to pass away because the show needed them to. And you could tell that because Westeros is not a safe place. The amount of stuff, because this happens in season 3, the amount of stuff that happens before that is crazy to me, that like you would ever think to go into somebody else's house knowing that you are going to pledge, like go against your pledge to marry their child, and expect you just to walk out of there with no repercussions whatsoever. And that really bothered me because in the show, Rob Stark is kind of shown as being like, oh, he's the figurehead, and he's really impressive because all these old characters, like that, like the old grandpa Lannister, is very shocked and scared of Rob Stark because he's constantly winning these battles against people, even though he's new to war. And like, it's not just him, other characters are also talking about Rob Stark, the oldest son, being very capable in war. And so it's crazy to me that they can talk about this character being so good at logic and like understanding what happens in war, that he would enter a room where you can clearly see that there's like an overhead balcony that kind of frames the entire room in like a U shape, where they have people placed that could, like, you know, take you out with arrows, if that makes sense. Like, you're on the lower floor with all this area around you that could be a trap, and there's no security. He doesn't bring soldiers. There's nothing that, like, the show manipulates you to be like, so you know when it starts happening that they have no escape. And my issue with that is not because that's not a good way to like shock an audience. It's more of the fact that you've established a character is very smart and thinks logically and knows that he's going against his word against people that he's barely allies with. And this falls into that trap. And that's kind of what opened my eyes. And I'm talking about this because A, it's kind of what allowed me to have a little bit of escapism over Christmas. But B, it's kind of like when you realize the game that's happening, it helps me separate myself more. Like, I'm talking about this as an example because a lot of us feel like when other people tell us things that what they're saying has to be our burden, when really you need, like, it's kind of like you take it in, you process what you can handle, and then make sure that you understand how to handle it, and then you move past it. And that's kind of like more of what I'm talking about is like, oh, well, he's processing, he's in this trap and he's not going to get out of it, but there's no like they're like, as somebody who did grow up in a haunted house, who became paranoid about stuff, it's just baffles me that not everybody would have that. And maybe, again, I think the writers do a really good job at manipulating the audience, and that manipulation of an audience is kind of what I enjoyed, because it did feel like, oh, this is a chess piece that has to happen, because guess who stumbles up when this happens to Rob and Mama Stark? Arya, who then goes on this huge journey of revenge, gets a list, goes off to train to become an assassin, you know, does all this stuff. Spoilers, yes, but it's been years. I don't care. But it was just like, oh, okay, so we have another piece pushing us in another direction. It's just, and that's kind of what I liked about the show so much, is it's kind of like, oh, well, this feels like a throwaway. It's brutal. I don't understand why we're watching it, but it plays a role in what's going on in the long run. And the thing I realized is this kind of, not everything I just talked about, the blood wedding, but the thing that it helps me, and this is what I don't know whether or not other people do, is it helped me kind of realize, oh, I kind of also only view at right now. Like, because I overthink things, I don't think I actually allow myself to ponder what today choices will mean in the long run. Like, for instance, if you are trying to lose weight, you have to do things day by day. It's not something that will happen, like, A, instantaneously, and B, if you think that you're always going to have the same choice every day, I think that you are either A, kidding yourself, or you have a level of discipline that I am striving for and hopefully will eventually receive. But For me, the thing that I want is like, oh, I need to prepare myself so that I'm always doing what needs to happen for my health. So then when I'm pushing myself to do these other things or like branch out and drive forward, that it's not just me repeating the same mistakes, because a lot of the change I want to happen is change you'll only see over time. It's not change that you're going to immediately notice every day. And that's kind of like what happens if you binge the show. I'm going to be honest. I don't think I as a person could handle a season by season rundown of Game of Thrones. Like, if I had to wait until the next season came out, I think I wouldn't have been able to finish the show, because so much happens that's literally just a buildup of the next part that we're not seeing in the next season. Like, I didn't realize that the Night King stuff happens in season 7, and it's barely in season 7, because most of that actually comes to fruition in season 8, the final season. And even like the Starks returning to Winterfell happens. So much happens in season 7, but like all that is what's driving like the tension in season 8. And if I spent like 2 years not watching the show and I just popped back in to watch the last season, I'd be very confused, because like all these little like notes that we're getting are based on these things that you might have completely forgot about, because I think with distance you lose sight of the game. For instance, a lot of Stark children escaped the first season, but I knew that the youngest Stark was not going to get out well, because they spent a lot of time with him and Braum, and they were sharing in this journey together. And then the youngest Stark goes out with somebody who's his protector, and he disappears until we need him to make you realize that this villain is extremely scary. But we don't bring him in and like show what he's been up to in those years. We're just like, oh no, Ramsay discovered a Stark. And now we have somebody that like matters to us in a major way as an audience, because we like the Stark family, because we have been shown like the trauma that happened to them. But like when you see him, it has nothing to do with the story. I'm sorry. Like, them holding that piece was a manipulation to make you realize, A, Ramsay's more of a threat than you thought he was, and B, how can we upset people without taking out the players that we need to wrap up the show in a good way? And so you kind of Dumbledore him in the fact that he reserves the youngest Stark until we're ready to get rid of him. And that's actually why I'm curious whether or not I should read the books, is because I am so fascinated by the manipulation of just the narrative in the show that it makes me want to read the books to know if that's happening by George R. Martin or if it's happening by the writers of the television series. Because I don't know, it's kind of like this glass shattered in my brain. And now I'm aware of this thing that happens in some shows where like some shows, it again, like I told you, like Gilmore Girls and then Glee, like it's not that these shows are free of manipulation, because Sue Sylvester in Glee definitely is manipulative the entire show. But that's just Sue is just the character being manipulative. The show is not doing anything specifically to like lead you one way or the other. I mean, music does that to you naturally, and so they do like gear you towards whatever kind of music tracks they want for that episode, but they don't like set up like, oh, you know what would be great to like really mess like with people, or you know what would be great to like really upset people, like it, you know what would be great, like it's just constantly like, how can we upset people the most? Like for instance, I don't know their name, but in King's Landing, there's a queen and her brother, And I, for the life of me, am like, how are these people? Because we have Cersei Lannister, who is, it's shocking the amount of people who like are still loyal to her based on how little she cares for her people. But the thing I with that like that happens is Cersei's playing a game with this other woman because she's trying to marry her son first, Joffrey, and then Tomlin, and it's a game of control over your child. And so that's fascinating to me. But also, it's the fact that Cersei gets called out on all her bad behavior. She gets called out with her own comeuppance because she didn't want to outright deny her son's wife. That like because her son's wife was trying to have more power than Cersei Lannister, and she couldn't have that, so she released like her own like goblin in a box by like creating this religious like zealots. I don't know that they're just like very you either believe or you get your like teeth beat in kind of religious organization. And she thinks that they're going to use their power on anybody but the king and queen or the royal people of King's Landing. And really, she gave them freedom to do whatever they wanted because she wanted to put this other person in their place. And, so things happen wrong. She has to take her walk of atonement. She gets yelled at, shame, shame, shame. We all know the quote. If not, look up the Family Guy skit because it's pretty funny. And it's just like, wow, we sometimes get lost in our own rage that we don't see the bigger monster or bigger picture. And so these things happen, and then Cersei, being a queen, doesn't want to face consequences because that doesn't happen to royals. So she just takes it upon herself to get rid of two birds with one stone. The monster she created and the person trying to take her son away from her, which then ends up being bad with her son anyway. But it's just manipulation. But like Cersei is a manipulator and you get that already. But it was kind of, I think that's season 6 is what I'm talking about. It's a beautifully concocted chess match between we think we're making strides to work towards a checkmate, but really we were just putting soldiers together to basically show you that the power that you think you have is fleeting, and really none of us have all that control. And I'm nerding out in this episode, and I'm sorry if that bothers some of you guys. It's just, I've never been so aware of the way that I process things than watching Game of Thrones, because I think it also opens your mind to like the little ways that we manipulate each other anyway in life. It's like, oh, this person doesn't actually feel this way. They're trying to get something from me, and I can give that to them if I really don't have, like, I care about that. Or I can ask them to just come out and say what they're needing, Because, like, me as a person, if you will ask me up front, I probably won't say no to anything within reason. I say within reason because I've had people ask weird things. I was in New York for a while, but I'll leave it at that. But it's kind of like, if you ask me with good intention and it's within my power, I am more likely to lean towards a yes than a no, especially if it's for somebody I care about. And it's amazing to me that a lot of people are afraid of asking. And instead of asking, they'll do passive aggressiveness or they'll dance around the question. And unfortunately, my brain does not understand dancing around the question, because I will answer 50 questions before I get to the question that you're trying to ask by being subtle. I don't under subtlety. You need to hit me over the head with a book. Like, I don't really, but like you need to make sure that you really tell me what you're looking for. And that's kind of like the thing that I like about the show in specifics, is because once they set it up for you, you really get like how this could all happen. For instance, another spoiler that I was aware of, which if I'm aware of it, I'm assuming most of the internet is, because that it was literally, I was shown in a short and I was like, well, that's great to know. I didn't know that I needed that spoiled, but Jon Snow. Jon Snow dies. He comes back. I knew that was a big thing. I was expecting it to be this big spectacle, but really it's like he passes away, and then because like binged it, an episode and a half later he's back to life. And I was like, oh, I thought this was going to be like an entire season arc of like we're going on this epic journey to bring Jon back to life. Nope, that wasn't the point. And then I realized the point wasn't to bring Jon Snow back to life. Hear me out if you're aware of Game of Thrones. Don't get mad at me. If you are aware of the finale, when Daenerys Targaryen leaves the east, like the desert side of the world, I forgot what it's called. She was in this temple, and the last thing she does to establish like her place there is she puts the like the Red Lady or the Red Witches. I don't know what they're called. I think they're called the Red Ladies. She puts one of them in charge of the temple before she leaves, and then she enters Westeros, and things happen, and then she befriends Jon Snow, and then they get really close, and then Jon Snow betrays her, and then supposedly she's dead. Spoiled by the internet. I don't care if I spoiled it for you, because if I got that Band-Aid ripped off without wanting it to be ripped off, then you're going to get it too. But I realized, hey, they could make another Game of Thrones season. They could continue it after like they age up a bit, because I've heard George R.R. Martin has been waiting to like do a time jump, and maybe that's what they're doing with this break, because they established that the Red Ladies can bring people back from the dead, and Daenerys was literally picked up by her baby dragon, and he flew off it towards the east. And if I thought the show was just being like, oh, it's really sweet because that's his mother, and they're just flying off, and that's a sweet thing for him to be like, I need to go bury my mom because she's special to me. If that was the type of show it was, I'm sure that it would be an ending. But there is nothing in Game of Thrones that doesn't have a payoff. And it's one of the very few like loose ends from the East that existed throughout the entire show. Like the Red Lady who's in the East is not the Red Lady that shows up in Winterfell and lights all the Dothraki's swords so they can fight the Night King. Like two different ladies, part of the same organization, I think, because they both have the same red beaded necklace. They're not lady. Well, they are ladies, but they're hags. That's what it seemed like they were alluding, that they are witches that are part of hags or whatever you want to call them. But I don't know. It's fascinating. Literally nothing is shown that doesn't mean something. For instance, Theon Greyjoy. You see so much of Theon Greyjoy, and more than I ever wanted to. And in season 3, you're like, why is Thai showing me all this stuff? I did not ask to see it. What is the point of going on for an entire season of just being brutally brutal to Theon Greyjoy? And then season 4 happens, and then you're like, oh, there was a reason, and there is a huge payoff. Because my friend watched the show before me, and he made this joke about Ramsay, and he was like, oh yeah, he's like the Hound. You don't know that in season 3. He's just some random guy who's like doing stuff to Theon, and you're just like, what is this guy's deal? I don't understand. You have no clue why he's doing all this stuff. Not a clue. There are dogs present, but the dogs don't do anything. He's just like, oh, he has 2 dogs over there. They're not like hunting people. They don't have like a reason for being there. We don't know why he's called the Hound. That all comes in season 4. That's when he takes up that identity. That's when he goes off and beats crazy. And I'm not going to talk about Ramsay's like things because it is brutal. But like all manipulation. So that way we have another game going on. Amount of games going on is crazy. Where now Theon has to like work through what happened to him and his betrayal, and whether or not, based on like the amount of fear that's been instilled in him, it's worth the bravery to protect people that he says he cares about. And that is kind of a surprising journey that ended up being one of my favorites. Was just like, all this mental game and torture leading into a very like satisfying, I want to say, arc for a character, because not only does he grow as a person, but he grows like in his courage and then like willingness to like put everything that he cares about on the line for somebody. And but again, the manipulation game is crazy. Like for instance, something that doesn't make sense to me because they made it a huge deal, and then Brahm falls from a tower, gets visions. His journey from the show is he's going to become the three-eyed raven who has visions about the past and present and maybe future. He sees everything in Westeros. That's kind of what his deal is. I thought that was going to be a big deal, and we were going to see like a training montage. We were going to understand what a three-eyed raven is, like, because that's what I was waiting for. Why is it so important? Because they don't show us. We like see him going on this journey, and then he disappears for all of season 4. Bye bye, Brum. I think he's going to die because he's gone for a season, and he comes back, and then they're like getting hunted by the Night King because now it's really, let's count it down. We know we're on the tail end of the show, so we got to make sure we ramp up this stuff really good. And I could tell that was a manipulation, and it wasn't. It's like, why is Braum important to the Night King? Because we told you. That was something that irked me in the show. Is just kind of like, oh, you really, for 3 seasons we really see him desperately climbing and going and trying to get somewhere. And then it kind of dissipates that like desperation by like skipping him for an entire season. And I just lost because in season 8, it's a huge deal that he becomes this three-eyed raven vision person. So much so that like by him being on a battlefield draws the Night King to him. But they don't really show him doing the things he's established as being capable of. Like Braum is supposedly able to like inhabit the minds of animals, and they are fighting a losing battle. And Braum is not doing anything. He's like, if I use my ability, it'll draw the Night King to me. And then he literally goes inside ravens, flies up to the Night King, and then the ravens never come back. It's like, okay, well I don't understand the deal with Braum, because Braum, to me, is the only chess piece that doesn't come back to the previous like moves on the board, if that makes sense. Like everybody else, like Jaime, Cersei, Daenerys, Jon, did I say Cersei again? I want to say Maisie Williams, but it's Arya and Sansa Stark. Like all of them, like their chess pieces keep moving upon their like current path, and it makes sense. And Braum doesn't. It's the only thing I have a problem with is I wish that they had shown it. Other thing, which if you're wanting the biggest example of this show is using things as a chess piece, the dragons in Game of Thrones are simply movers on a board. They make this huge deal in like season 3 about the dragons not listening to Daenerys. And then why aren't they listening? Just because we wanted to give some like struggle to Daenerys Targaryen. Because if that was really an important like thread that we needed to see these dragons learn how to obey or like trust or like be, really, attached to Daenerys, we would have shown her training and like helping them like listen to her more. But like literally Daenerys flies away for a minute, and then when she comes back, the dragons are like obeying her again. And that was the biggest example to me of like, oh, the dragons aren't real. I mean, dragons aren't real. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like, oh, there are dragons today in the reality of world. But like, if you watch Dragonheart, if you watch Aragon, even if you don't like that movie, if you literally watch if you watch The Desolation of Smaug, the Hobbit movie, the dragon has a character. He has a sense of like reasoning. Even the dragon in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, who just wants to protect her egg and is like really aggressive, even she has a message, knows what she wants, is doing things of her own choices. The dragons in Game of Thrones do what their masters want, and if they're not doing that, it's because It's something the show is trying to use to like exploit the audience in some way. A biggest example is in the prequel show House of Dragons, where they are running out of people that are riders, but they have these extra dragons that could really use some dragon, they need dragon riders. And so, Rhaenyra is her name in the prequel. She just brings together all these people that could have Targaryen blood, and anybody the dragons don't choose to kill gets to have like the royal treatment and gets to ride their own dragon. But you know who they're gonna pick because they don't show like these two guys for like 8 episodes before they actually have any purpose. Like they're just doing random stuff, and I'm like, oh, I guess we're going to finally show, like they call them the low ones or the lowly ones. It's kind of messed up for like, oh, I'm the king and you're the lowly people. Like, it was really crazy. That I was like, that's a crazy nickname for your like, your, what do you call it? Your people. I wanted to call it your servants, but they don't all work for you. They're just like, oh, these people live in King's Landing, but they're not as important as us because they're the low ones. But like the dragons end up killing a lot of those Targaryen people purely because they wanted those people to earn that because they have established you have to earn the right to be a dragon rider. But it was just like, wow, the amount of manipulation going on is crazy. Like, again, it's really fun for me, but it's just something like I have now addressed this in my own life. Like, there are shows I'm watching where I now look at this, or like sometimes when I'm talking to people, I realize, oh, wow, this person doesn't actually care about what they're telling to me. They want something from me. So they're setting it up in a way that manipulates me to get them what they want. Now, I have a very toxic family, so I'm aware of toxic, like toxicity. And my family did do this a lot emotionally, where it's like, again, if you ask me a straightforward question, I am 95% sure I would say yes. 5%, again, if it's out of my control or safety is at all concerned. It's very like few things I wouldn't do for somebody else. But like, I have a problem when people can't ask you directly, like, if you want me to take out your trash, just say, you take out the trash. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, that's fine. But if people like, oh, I can't go out and smell that trash anymore. Like that raccoon, last time I took out that trash, it attacked me so hard, and now I have a lot of like PTSD and trauma from that raccoon. And I'm like, you can tell me that story when we're talking about story. Like if you're sharing and you want to tell me about this crazy raccoon that attacked you, please, I'm all ears. Tell me that's a fascinating story about a raccoon that attacked you because you had trash in your hand. I think it's a fun story at least. But if you like but that before asking like, can you help me? That is a lot for my brain. Sorry, my camera just got knocked accidentally because I was talking animatedly because I'm a hand mover. But back to the point is, if you have to add a story, please tell me the story after you ask what you want from me. Because if I sense I'm being manipulated, that's when I start feeling like I shouldn't do it. But like, so I try just to be upfront with people. I'm like, hey, do you want to go out? There's a movie playing, or we can do this thing. Like, I'll be like, here's a plan. Here's a time. When do you want to meet? Like, I do very direct communication, and because I don't comprehend like circle answers. And that's kind of, I think the only thing I found refreshing from Game of Thrones is once you're on somebody's like bad list, they're not subtle. They like either are outright, trying to kill you, or they are outright making it so you're on the run, or they're trying to protect you. Like Brienne of Tarth, up front, shows up, says, "Lady, you don't know me." Said that to both Arya and Sansa. She's like, your mother told me to free Jaime Lannister so I could go and protect you and be your knight, so you guys would have protection. That's why I'm here. up front, first conversation, she tells them why they're here, and then they're like, well, we haven't had good luck with that in the past. But she's like, I am being upfront and telling you to the point why I'm here. And then because they both are not trusting, logical, because what's happened to those two girls, things happen to them again. And then they're like, oh, Brienne, yeah, you should be here because you're actually very trustworthy, and I didn't see that before. And it's just refreshing to be upfront with people, don't you think? I wish people would stop playing the game of Thrones. Like, I wish we would stop being like, to me, it's like the ultimate balancing scale. It's a thing that you have to really like knock off if you want to really see like we're all equal. Is like we get told a lot of things that like somebody's opinion matters more than somebody else's, and that is simply not true. It's a falsity. And really, once we discover our own power, which that's what all the Starks have to find out, is like once they discover their own power, they're actually very formidable people. But before then, they're kind of children being under the protection of their parent. And because of that, a lot of bad things happen to them. But once they're aware of the way people can treat them, they know how to handle it. And that's kind of also, it's also a very extreme example of what becoming an adult is. And I don't know, I just thought there were a lot of parallels between like DBT and mental health and like the manipulation we sometimes find in life and the way we sometimes have to like figure out in our own brains how to process it in a way that A, we can handle, and B, we can figure out our own moves to not only protect ourselves but also set ourselves up for success, especially if you're going to be around people that you might view as toxic in long term in the future. That's it for my spiel about Game of Thrones. Thank you for jumping on that bandwagon. I hope you guys enjoy this episode. I love talking about it. I might talk about another show next week because I've been on a roll because of the holiday. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. Feel free to hit the subscribe button if you want. I really appreciate it. Leave a comment. I love responding to them. And subscribe. Thank you guys so much. And I will see you guys next time. But before I go, as always, remember just to take a moment right now. Could be the moment. Just take a second. Be like, just take a moment for yourself. And remember that it's important to show up for yourself because you matter.